Welcome back to Stan's Garden Center and our podcast of Behind the Scenes, talking about all the seedy business going on here at Stan's Garden Center. And for those of you that are locals that shop at Stan's, yes, I forgot a hat. I've never been at Stan's without a hat. I forgot a hat today. I had a warm beanie on because it's cool. They said I can't have that nerd-looking beanie on during the podcast. So I'm airing the bald head out today. People have been saying, who is that at Stan's now? Who's working there doing the podcasts? Because they've never seen me without a hat. So I am doing these podcasts without a hat, and I'm inside, so there's no glare today. We're going to talk about water. The water is the actual lifeblood of everything. It really controls everything. It carries the nutrition. Hydration is massive. The soil that we use is nothing if it's not hydrated properly. So I'm really kind of going to go into behind the scenes a little bit, really give you a bit of science as to what's going on with the whole water side of things. We had been kind of limping along and kind of using crutches, injecting things into our water to try to make the water more desirable for plant material. This is not to say that our city water here at Erie is phenomenal. It's phenomenal for people bathing. It's coming from the lake. It's great for residents. It's not so good for our plant material because of certain things that people like isn't ideal for the plants. I'm not really even talking about fluoride and such. It doesn't cause too much of a problem. I'm talking about alkalinity and pH. And ideally temperature, but temperature is a very expensive venture to try to warm up all the water we use. How much water do we use is in this silo. This silo carries just shy of what we use in a day. It's between 10 and 11,000 gallons of water here in this silo. So back before we had this silo, we had to rely on a 2-inch main that supplied the whole property. The property now is over 6.5 acres of greenhouse, 1.5 acres of nursery. There's perennial production, hanging basket production, and with all the automation is pumping a lot of water out all simultaneously. It's not just the two growers with the hose, which we'll see a little of that, but we can run water in many greenhouses at one time, and this 2-inch main that was coming in just wasn't enough. You'd hear on our radios, we'd talk to one another, say, hey, can you turn something off so I can finish water in this house, and then we can turn on this one later. That was going on. So we built this facility here, a massive investment for us, a very big investment in this room, in order to house enough water in that silo per day to distribute or network out to the greenhouses. So as this facility grew, as this family business grew, we didn't have enough water pressure, we didn't have enough volume, and ideally the water that we're distributing to the plant material is not perfect for their growing habits. Okay, what I mean by that I'm going to show you. It's actually simplistic. It looks a little bit complicated. Pumps running, whistling. There's water trickling in the top. But how this works is the water coming from the city. The Erie Water Works is distributing water into this tank that is just in like a toilet valve, basically. When the water level goes down, it starts filling up the tank. That gives us an overnight collection of an entire day's water that we can distribute out at a much more networked pace from a central location here. So what's coming in is only a 2-inch line. That's all we have coming from the city's network. And because we have a large collection, it goes through these 2 frequency pumps here. And the more water we demand, the harder those pumps work. It keeps 60 pounds of pressure all the time. And it's going out with a 3-inch main. Well, it doesn't take Alyssa, mathematic genius, to say that 2-inch main is not going to be as much water as a 3-inch main. So during the day, it's actually starting to suck down that water level to a point that it's distributing it faster than it's actually coming into our garden center. That should solve our water pressure and volume issues. So if we're going to do that, if we're going to have this big silo of 10,000 gallons of water so that we don't run out of water during the day and can distribute it to all our networks more efficiently, we might as well adjust the water to be ideal for plant material. That's what the next loop, they call it, is doing. So this one is simply pumping, taking water out of the silo, putting it back in our network. This one here, very similar to a pool filter. It is actually a style of pool filter pump, and the water is just that, a loop. It is pulling in 3 inches of water from in the silo and it is coming through, injecting sulfuric acid into this water, and the computer is constantly measuring the amount of water flowing through the sensor and what the pH is at the sensor. Okay, so this is easing into a 6.1 pH. It says 6.14 right now, and it's injecting 2% of the liquid in there because it doesn't want to go past that. So you don't want to race into getting to 6.10 because it could accidentally end up at like 5.8. So it's only injecting 2% of the sulfuric acid at one time, because if you can hear the water pouring in, that water coming in from the city network is 7.8, 7.9, and it has a high degree of alkalinity. And total alkalinity is all the things dissolved in there, like calcium chloride, that is making that water a little bit too sweet for plant material to appreciate. So that acid takes that calcium and dissolves it slowly over a period of time. Very much putting like a battery terminal cleaner on your battery terminal. It kind of makes that foam and eats over a slow period of time. That's what's going on in our water right now, mixing this sulfuric acid, constantly checking the pH every second of every day, and it's injecting that acid in there. Once this process is done, it's time to deliver that water to the plant material, and we do that with a host of different ways. We're going to walk back up in the greenhouse and show you how this water is delivered to the plants. So we're up in our glass greenhouse here. We call this range B. We are starting a lot of production all at once. A lot happens all at once in the early season. And when young plants get put into a lot of soil, we like to be very, very critical of how much water they get. So we will hand water them. Each individual pot will hand water them just to make sure they're not being oversaturated until those roots get down into the pot. When I kind of coach customers, when they come in and want to know how they water their plants, what the proper way is, I will say, I kind of coined this phrase over and over again. I kind of repeat myself hundreds, if not thousands of times in a growing season, that the act of overwatering is not watering too thoroughly, it's watering too frequently. So the science behind that is plant material likes to have oxygen. It has space for them roots to expand. And a lot of people think that, plant material just loves to be watered, loves to be watered, loves to be watered. But the amount or the duration of how wet that soil stays is critical in the youthful stage of these plants. So we're taking a little tiny root system and putting it into this giant pot. It's capable for that soil to stay too wet, especially what everybody calls the million bells here, the mini petunia. They're actually calibrachoa. If you wanted to know how to pronounce that word, I hear calibroca, I've heard everything. Calibrachoa doesn't like long stand wet feet. Okay, so this soil stays nice and fluffy. It's easy to hold moisture down in there. So we hand water early, which is a labor-intensive process, but it makes the best quality root system so that we can really control how much water goes into this young, youthful root system. So back in the day, the modern technology to water things on the bench behind me was what we called spaghetti tubes. And I'm going to give you a little bit of behind the scenes here of our seedy business going on with water. These spaghetti tubes would go into a tray, and the tray would fill up, and it would sub-irrigate, meaning it would water from the bottom and soak up through. So what's happened over the years is our old-fashioned wooden bench and our tubing has both started to fail. The bench is no longer completely flat, so it tips to one side, so one plant gets wetter than the other plant. It's just not efficient. It's not a good production method. So we've started to migrate away from the spaghetti tube and plastic tray to a much more efficient, much more consistent form of water that doesn't have a degrading wooden bench anymore, and it actually waters the plant exactly the same from beginning to end. And this is this computer-generated trough system that can set a timer, and the water can turn on at this end, and it slowly floods all the way down to the other end with 2% of fall, so that that plant soaks up the amount of moisture that it needs to be saturated. So if this plant were drier, it's going to soak up till it's saturated. If this plant were wetter, it's not going to soak up as much. It's going to make every plant even all the way down. And this is what we call the troughs. And that's because they sit in these 8-inch troughs, and we can water lots of different things: 6-inch pots, 3-inch pots, 4-inch pots, all sitting in these troughs. When we talked about in our previous podcast episode, growing geraniums, they don't like to get wet leaves when they're bigger. They'll get sick. They get a thing called botrytis. They get all kinds of problems with leaf fungus. They like a lot of air circulation, and they don't like top water. So this is one of the biggest reasons that we grow using sub-irrigation, by watering from the beginning and letting them soak all down through. That means the grower staff, like Kyle watering here, doesn't need to get the leaf wet every time a geranium soil needs watered. So a couple other forms of delivering. We talked about the pH of the water. We talked about having enough water. One other thing is, if we grow over 25,000 hanging baskets, it would be impossible for the growing staff to water them every day like they need it, to water them thoroughly enough, to water them efficiently enough. So once they get enough roots, basically so they get roots to the bottom of the pot, then they'll get hung on the spaghetti tubes up here. So we can literally water thousands and thousands of baskets all at one time, because there's what we call an emitter that just creates a drip, the same volume of water in each individual weight there that sits in the pot, that can water the whole line all at once. That too is hooked to a timer that will allow that to water a specific amount of time. Then the growing staff doesn't need to come back and remember to turn off the water. It will shut off on its own. That's how we get all of the hanging baskets that are started early like this to be watered in late season. Stay tuned. Like us, follow us. We're going to give you a lot of behind the scenes information about what's going on here at Stan's Garden Center in Erie, Pennsylvania, how we are commercially growing plant material hanging baskets from cuttings, from seeds, what our water supply is, how we talk about fertilizer. We're going to let you know what's going on behind the scenes so that your product that's available at our garden center is produced to the highest quality and the best availability we can achieve here in Erie.